It was the hardest day of my life. The kind of day you wish you could erase from memory, but know you never will. My son, David, was gone. Just like that, one moment, everything seemed normal. The next, I was standing over his casket, feeling like the world had collapsed in on me. I've heard people say that when you lose a child, you lose a part of yourself. But nothing can truly prepare you for the kind of pain that comes with burying your own flesh and blood. It wasn't just the loss of David that hurt. It was the sense of betrayal, too. The feeling that life had suddenly turned upside down and I had no control over it anymore. David was my only son. We'd been through everything together, good times, bad times, laughter, and tears. I thought we had built something strong, something that would last, something that would carry on through generations. But it was all slipping away, piece by piece, even before he was in the ground. The funeral home was packed with family, friends, and acquaintances, many of whom I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was pretending like everything was okay, while I stood there with my grief, my pain, and the hollow feeling that only someone who's lost their child can truly understand. I had already lost my wife Margaret 2 years earlier. The two of them were supposed to grow old together, but instead, here I was, an old man, alone, surrounded by the whispers of a world that had moved on without me. Then came the moment that I'll never forget. As I was standing by the casket, trying to hold back the tears that kept threatening to fall, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Victoria, my daughter-in-law. She had always been a strong presence in the family, always ready to take charge, to push everyone else aside if she thought it was for the greater good. But today, she seemed different, colder, sharper. "Stop crying," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her in shock. Was she serious? My son had just died, and she was telling me to stop crying? She pulled me aside, away from the mourners. The look in her eyes was one of frustration and impatience, as if she couldn't bear the sight of me grieving anymore. "Pack your bags," she continued. "You need to leave, now." I felt like I had been slapped in the face. There, at my son's funeral, I was being told to leave my own home. The home that I had built with my own 2 hands. The home where David and I had shared so many memories. The home that, for years, had been a symbol of family. But to her, it was just property. To her, I was just an inconvenience. She went on, her words growing more cutting by the second. "I've had enough of you hanging around here. This is my house now, and I don't have room for you." The nerve, the audacity. I stood there, speechless, struggling to process what she had just said. The grief that I had been trying to contain rushed back in full force, but I couldn't even let myself cry anymore. Instead, I stood there, frozen, watching as Victoria's eyes glinted with what seemed like satisfaction. She didn't care about the history of that house. She didn't care about the memories that were embedded in every corner of the place, the laughter, the tears, the moments that had made it home. To her, it was just another piece of real estate, another item to add to her collection. But what she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the house wasn't hers. It never was. I had built that house in 1987 with my own hands. I paid for everything, the lot, the construction, the materials. It was my home, my sanctuary. David and I had worked on it together, every step of the way. We put in the hours, the sweat, the love, and now, to hear her call it hers, as if I had no claim to it, was the final insult. But I didn't say anything. I didn't argue. I didn't shout or lash out. I just looked at her, nodded slowly, and walked away. Sometimes, silence is the most powerful response. The room was spinning as I made my way out of the funeral home, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap to the face. It was early spring, but the chill in the air felt like winter, as if the world itself was mourning with me. My hands were shaking, and I tried to steady myself, trying to process the scene I had just witnessed. But all I could think about was what Victoria had said. "Pack your bags and get out." She couldn't possibly understand what that house meant to me. I had built that place. Margaret and I had dreamed of it for years before we even bought the lot. We spent every waking hour planning the design, choosing the materials, picking out the furnishings. It wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. It was where David grew up, where we celebrated birthdays, holidays, and the quiet moments that made life meaningful. Now, here I was, being told to leave it all behind. But what hurt the most wasn't just the house. It was the way Victoria had dismissed everything I had ever done. She had no idea the sacrifices I had made. She had no clue about the work, the sweat, the blood that went into everything. She only saw what she wanted to see, a grieving father-in-law who had outlived his usefulness, someone she could push aside and ignore. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I had nowhere else to turn. My closest friends had long since moved away, and I hadn't kept in touch with most of them. My family? Well, Victoria had already made sure to isolate me from them. She was good at that, pushing people away when they became inconvenient. She'd done it to David, too, in the end. For a moment, I considered just leaving, packing my things and walking away like she wanted me to. Maybe I could go to a nursing home or a senior living facility, find some corner to hide in and wait out the rest of my days. But no, that wasn't going to happen. Not after everything I had built. Not after everything I had endured. The house was mine. It always had been. And if Victoria thought she could take it from me just because she had married David, she was sorely mistaken. I would fight for it, fight for the memories that were embedded in every inch of that house. I wasn't going to let her erase it all just because she thought she could take control. But I couldn't confront her just yet. Not while I was still raw with grief. Not while my emotions were running wild. No, I needed time. I needed to think. The next few days passed in a blur. The funeral had come and gone, but the weight of Victoria's words hung over me like a cloud. She had made it clear that I wasn't welcome in my own home, but I wasn't about to let her dictate the terms of my life. I spent the first few days holed up in the house, trying to process what had happened. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to hear anyone's platitudes or fake sympathy. I needed to figure out my next move. But as the days went on, I realized I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Victoria was right about one thing. I was dependent on David's support. Without him, I didn't have the financial means to support myself. But I wasn't helpless. I'd spent my life managing finances, working as a CPA, and taking care of my own business. I had built that house with my own hands. I had made sure every bill was paid, every account was balanced. And I had always kept meticulous records. Victoria had made the mistake of assuming that David had handled everything, that I was just a passive bystander in my own life. She had no idea what was coming. I walked into the basement one morning, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on me. The basement had always been my sanctuary. It was where I stored everything, every important document, every receipt, every contract. Margaret used to joke that I was like a squirrel, hoarding paperwork for the future. And she was right. I walked over to the filing cabinet in the corner of the room, the one I hadn't opened in months. I knew what I needed to find, the documents that would prove everything, the deed to the house, the financial records, the trust documents. I opened the first drawer and started to sift through the papers. It was like stepping into a different world. Each folder was neatly labeled, organized by decade. There, in the back of the 1980s folder, was the document I had been looking for, the original deed to the house. I smiled to myself as I pulled it out. It was all right there. Thomas Mitchell, owner. No co-signers, no joint ownership. I had paid cash for everything. It had always been mine. David had never owned the house. I pulled out the next folder, 1990s. More tax receipts, more documents proving I had paid every bill, every expense. Then the 2000s, same thing. And finally, the 2000s and 10s, and the most recent year, 2024. Everything was in order, everything was accounted for. But then, in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found something that made my heart race. A folder labeled Trust Documents, Private. I knew exactly what it was. This was the document that would change everything, the trust agreement that Margaret and I had created years ago, long before David was even born. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. I opened it carefully, the yellowed pages crackling under my fingers. Inside, I found the terms and conditions that Victoria had no idea existed. The trust had been set up with one simple rule. David was a beneficiary during his lifetime, but the ownership always remained with the trust. And now, as the sole surviving trustee, it was mine. I couldn't help but smile. Victoria had no idea what she was in for. The weight of the documents in my hands felt heavier than I had anticipated. I knew exactly what I needed to do, but I also knew that timing was everything. If I confronted Victoria too soon, she would dismiss me, perhaps even threaten me with the police. She thought she had control, but she didn't know what was coming. I took my time going through the trust documents again. The papers were clear, the terms explicit. David was never meant to have ownership. The trust was designed to ensure that Margaret and I would always have control over our assets, even after our deaths. The house, the money, everything David thought was his to inherit was still under my control. And the best part? The life insurance policy. Victoria had assumed that David had left everything to her, but in reality, the beneficiary was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. That meant, once again, it was mine. The money she had been spending, assuming it was hers to spend, was never intended for her at all. But I couldn't just march over to her and throw these documents in her face. No, I had to play this carefully. I had to let her dig herself into a deeper hole. I opened the first drawer and started to sift through the papers. It was like stepping into a different world. Each folder was neatly labeled, organized by decade. There, in the back of the 1980s folder, was the document I had been looking for, the original deed to the house. I smiled to myself as I pulled it out. It was all right there. Thomas Mitchell, owner. No co-signers, no joint ownership. I had paid cash for everything. It had always been mine. David had never owned the house. I pulled out the next folder, 1990s. More tax receipts, more documents proving I had paid every bill, every expense. Then the 2000s, same thing. And finally, the 2000s and 10s, and the most recent year, 2024. Everything was in order, everything was accounted for, but then, in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found something that made my heart race. A folder labeled Trust Documents, Private. I knew exactly what it was. This was the document that would change everything, the trust agreement that Margaret and I had created years ago, long before David was even born. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. I opened it carefully, the yellowed pages crackling under my fingers. Inside, I found the terms and conditions that Victoria had no idea existed. The trust had been set up with one simple rule. David was a beneficiary during his lifetime, but the ownership always remained with the trust. And now, as the sole surviving trustee, it was mine. I couldn't help but smile. Victoria had no idea what she was in for. The weight of the documents in my hands felt heavier than I had anticipated. I knew exactly what I needed to do, but I also knew that timing was everything. If I confronted Victoria too soon, she would dismiss me, perhaps even threaten me with the police. She thought she had control, but she didn't know what was coming. I took my time going through the trust documents again. The papers were clear, the terms explicit. David was never meant to have ownership. The trust was designed to ensure that Margaret and I would always have control over our assets, even after our deaths. The house, the money, everything David thought was his to inherit was still under my control. And the best part? The life insurance policy. Victoria had assumed that David had left everything to her, but in reality, the beneficiary was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. That meant, once again, it was mine. The money she had been spending, assuming it was hers to spend, was never intended for her at all. But I couldn't just march over to her and throw these documents in her face. No, I had to play this carefully. I had to let her dig herself into a deeper hole. I spent the next few days preparing. I reviewed every document, made copies of everything that proved my case, and kept the originals safely stored. I even began planning for my next move. The thought of leaving the house had crossed my mind. Victoria would love that, wouldn't she? To see me walk away with my tail between my legs, but that wasn't going to happen. Not now, not after everything I'd been through. I had lived in that house for over 30 years. I had built it from the ground up. Every corner, every beam, every brick was a part of me. It was where I had raised David. It was where I had spent the happiest years of my life with Margaret. I wasn't about to let some greedy, arrogant woman take that from me. On the 5th day after the funeral, I got the call. It was Victoria. She had made the mistake of calling me, assuming I would be compliant, assuming I would roll over like I always had. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I know this situation is hard for you, losing David, everything. It's a lot to handle. I just want to make sure you're taken care of, Tom." I could hear the false sweetness in her voice. She didn't care about me. She cared about the house, about the money. She thought I was a fool. "I'm doing fine, Victoria," I replied, my voice calm, controlled. "I've had a lot of time to think." "Well," she said, "I know you're probably feeling a little lost. That's why I've been looking into some places for you. I thought I'd help you out. There's a nice little senior community I found. Sunset Manor. It's affordable, and I think it would be a good fit for you. It's only $800 a month for a studio. It's not much, but it's something." My blood boiled. $800 a month? What did she think I was? A charity case? I had worked my entire life, and she thought I would just accept whatever crumbs she threw at me. "I'm not interested in moving to a senior community, Victoria," I said firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "Oh, Tom," she said with that condescending tone, "I'm just trying to help. You can't stay here forever. It's not practical." "Is that what you think?" I asked, my voice growing colder. "That I can't take care of myself?" She paused. I could tell I had caught her off guard. For a moment, there was silence on the line. "I'll be by to check in on you soon," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "We need to talk about what's going to happen with the house. The bank is already looking for answers." And just like that, she dropped the bombshell. She had been making plans to sell the house. She was already thinking of how she could cash in on everything. She thought she could take everything I had worked for and walk away with it. But she had no idea that her plan was about to backfire. The next day, I took the documents to my lawyer. I made sure everything was in order. The trust, the deed, the insurance policy, everything was clear. I needed legal confirmation that I was in the right before I made my next move. It didn't take long for the lawyer to confirm what I already knew. The house was mine, the money was mine, and Victoria had no legal claim to any of it. "Tom," the lawyer said as he looked over the papers, "you have a solid case here. It's clear that the house and the trust were always in your name. Victoria has no standing here." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to let her steal my life's work just because she thought she could bully me into submission. I left the lawyer's office with a sense of purpose. It was time to take control. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. I kept myself busy, organizing the documents and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Victoria was getting more arrogant with every phone call, every visit. She didn't realize that the more she pushed me, the more I was solidifying my resolve. I had spent too many years being silent, too many years letting others dictate the terms of my life, but not anymore. I wasn't going to let her get away with disrespecting me, with trying to erase everything I had worked for. I had made up my mind. It was time for her to face the truth. I would show her the documents, make her understand that she had no claim to the house, no claim to the life insurance, no claim to anything. The power had always been in my hands. I had simply chosen not to use it. But before I confronted her, I needed to make one final move. I reached out to a few people who had known me and Margaret long before Victoria had come into the picture. People who had witnessed the years of hard work, the love, and the sacrifices we had made. I needed them to back me up, to help show Victoria just how much she had misunderstood. One of those people was Helen Davis, our longtime neighbor. Helen had lived next door since the day we first built the house. She had seen it all, the hard work, the laughter, the struggles, the triumphs. She was a witness to everything, and I knew I could count on her to help me. I invited Helen over for coffee, and we sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Margaret and I had spent so many years together. As I told Helen what had been happening, her face grew. I opened the first drawer and started to sift through the papers. It was like stepping into a different world. Each folder was neatly labeled, organized by decade. There, in the back of the 1980s folder, was the document I had been looking for, the original deed to the house. I smiled to myself as I pulled it out. It was all right there. Thomas Mitchell, owner. No co-signers, no joint ownership. I had paid cash for everything. It had always been mine. David had never owned the house. I pulled out the next folder, 1990s. More tax receipts, more documents proving I had paid every bill, every expense. Then the 2000s, same thing. And finally, the 2000s and 10s, and the most recent year, 2024. Everything was in order, everything was accounted for. But then, in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found something that made my heart race. A folder labeled Trust Documents, Private. I knew exactly what it was. This was the document that would change everything, the trust agreement that Margaret and I had created years ago, long before David was even born. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. I opened it carefully, the yellowed pages crackling under my fingers. Inside, I found the terms and conditions that Victoria had no idea existed. The trust had been set up with one simple rule. David was a beneficiary during his lifetime, but the ownership always remained with the trust. And now, as the sole surviving trustee, it was mine. I couldn't help but smile. Victoria had no idea what she was in for. The weight of the documents in my hands felt heavier than I had anticipated. I knew exactly what I needed to do, but I also knew that timing was everything. If I confronted Victoria too soon, she would dismiss me, perhaps even threaten me with the police. She thought she had control, but she didn't know what was coming. I took my time going through the trust documents again. The papers were clear, the terms explicit. David was never meant to have ownership. The trust was designed to ensure that Margaret and I would always have control over our assets, even after our deaths. The house, the money, everything David thought was his to inherit was still under my control. And the best part? The life insurance policy. Victoria had assumed that David had left everything to her, but in reality, the beneficiary was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. That meant, once again, it was mine. The money she had been spending, assuming it was hers to spend, was never intended for her at all. But I couldn't just march over to her and throw these documents in her face. No, I had to play this carefully. I had to let her dig herself into a deeper hole. Worked for stays in my hands. David was a beneficiary, but not the owner. And as for the life insurance policy, the beneficiary was never you. It was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, which means it's mine. Victoria's face turned pale as she read through the documents. Her hands trembled, and I could see the shock in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming. She had assumed she could push me around, that I would just roll over and let her take control. But she was wrong. "I don't believe this," she said, her voice shaky. "This can't be real." "It's real," I said, my voice firm. "Everything you thought you knew about this house, about David, about me, it's all wrong. You made assumptions, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences." Victoria sat back in her chair, staring at the documents in disbelief. I could see the realization sinking in, the weight of her arrogance and her assumptions crashing down on her. "I don't want any of this," she said finally, her voice cracking. I just wanted to make things easier. I just wanted control. You had no right to take control, I said, my voice calm but firm. This house, these memories, they're mine, and I'm not going to let you take them from me. You've made your decisions, and now you'll have to live with them. Victoria sat in stunned silence, her eyes glued to the documents in front of her. For the first time since the funeral, I saw a crack in her composure, a flicker of vulnerability. She wasn't the confident, self-assured woman she had been at the funeral. Now she looked like someone who had just realized they had made a terrible mistake. I could tell she was processing what I had just said, trying to make sense of the documents, the trust, the insurance policy. But there was no denying it. The truth was right in front of her. I didn't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, you didn't, I replied, my tone steady. And you didn't bother to ask. You assumed everything was yours because you married David. You never once stopped to consider that there might be more to this story. She shook her head, clearly rattled. I thought David handled everything. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was just trying to make sure you were taken care of. I laughed bitterly. That's not what you were doing. You were taking control. You were trying to erase my life, my memories, everything I've worked for. You wanted me gone, so you could turn this house into something else, something that suited you. Victoria finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Tom. I never meant for any of this to happen. I looked at her, my expression softening just slightly. I know you didn't, but your actions spoke louder than your words. And now, you have to live with that. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What happens now? I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This house is still mine, and I intend to stay here. As for the rest, well, that's for the lawyers to sort out. I'll make sure you understand that this isn't just about money or property. This is about respect. You can't take what doesn't belong to you, and you can't erase what's been built over decades. The house, the memories, those are mine, and no one can take them from me. Victoria remained silent, her head bowed. She had no response. She knew I was right. There was nothing more she could say. I'll give you some time, I said, turning to leave. But don't think for a second that I'm just going to disappear. I built this life, and I'm not letting anyone take it from me. As I walked out of the room, I could hear her behind me, but I didn't turn around. I had made my point. Victoria had learned the hard way that respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned. And she had lost mine the moment she tried to take what was rightfully mine. The next few days were strange. It was like nothing had changed and yet everything had. I went about my routine as best I could, but the weight of what had just transpired loomed over me. Victoria had tried to take everything, to control everything, and for a brief moment I had allowed her to believe she could. But now, the tables had turned. I had always prided myself on my ability to remain calm under pressure. But in those quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right decision. I wasn't the kind of man who went around looking for confrontation. I had spent most of my life quietly building my world, bit by bit, taking pride in the simple things. My family, my home, my work. But now, everything was different. I wasn't just standing up for my house. I was standing up for myself, for my dignity, for the life I had built. And that wasn't something I was willing to give up. As the days passed, I could feel Victoria watching me. She didn't approach me again directly, but I could see her eyes following me from across the room. She wasn't used to being in this position. She was used to controlling things, to making decisions without any pushback. But now, she was forced to reckon with the fact that I wasn't going to let her dictate my future. The phone calls kept coming. Sometimes she'd leave a message, her voice calm but strained, trying to sound composed, as though she hadn't just spent days trying to force me out of my own home. I didn't return them. I knew she wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to try to regain control. She thought that by speaking to me, she could convince me to back down. But I wasn't about to fall for that again. One evening, about a week after the confrontation, I sat on the porch of the house, the same porch where David and I had spent hours talking about life. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the lawn, and, for a moment, I could almost feel Margaret's presence beside me. It was as if the house itself was holding on to the memories of everything we had shared. The air was still, the only sound being the chirping of the crickets in the distance. But in the quiet, I could feel a change in the atmosphere. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore, I was fighting for my place in this world, for the respect I deserved, and for the dignity that had been taken from me. I thought about what Victoria had said when she told me to leave, how she had dismissed me as if I were nothing more than a burden. But I wasn't a burden. I had lived a full life. I had built something. I wasn't just some old man waiting to be tossed aside. I had earned my place in this world, and no one was going to take that from me. Not Victoria, not anyone. The next morning, I made my decision. It was time to take action. I wasn't going to wait around for Victoria to come crawling back, asking for forgiveness. No, I was going to make sure she understood that the house, the legacy, everything, was mine to control. If she wanted to fight for it, she would have to do it the right way, through the law. I called my lawyer and set up a meeting for the following week. I needed to make sure I had all my ducks in a row, that everything was in order before I took the next step. The last thing I wanted was to end up in some legal battle over something that was already mine. But I knew Victoria wouldn't give up that easily. She had already shown me what kind of person she was. When the day of the meeting came, I walked into the lawyer's office with a sense of calm. I wasn't worried anymore. I had everything I needed, proof of ownership, proof of the trust, and a solid case. "Tom, you've done everything right," my lawyer said after reviewing the documents. "Victoria has no claim to the house. She can't just take what's yours because she feels entitled to it. We'll file the paperwork, and it will be settled. But we need to make sure she knows we're serious." "I don't want to make it personal," I said, my voice steady. "I just want what's rightfully mine. I don't want this to turn into a nasty legal battle, but if it has to, I'm ready." "You've earned that right," my lawyer replied. "But we're not going to let her take advantage of you. We'll do this the right way." And with that, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It was about making sure that Victoria understood that I wasn't going to let her push me around. I had earned my place, and I wasn't going to let her take it away from me. The following week, as I awaited the legal proceedings to begin, I found myself pacing the house more than usual. The quiet corners that had once brought me comfort now felt like reminders of everything I was fighting to keep. Victoria hadn't made any moves to contact me directly since our last confrontation, and I wasn't sure if she was avoiding me or simply too embarrassed to face the truth. But it didn't matter. What mattered now was taking the next steps to protect what was mine. Each day, I made a point to walk through the house and revisit the memories that had made it a home. I paused at the living room, where the worn-out recliner still sat in the same place where David had spent countless hours watching his favorite shows. I ran my fingers over the old wooden shelves, the ones Margaret and I had built together, and I smiled faintly. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every decoration told a story of love, struggle, and triumph. These were not just objects, they were part of my identity. But no matter how much I cherished these memories, I knew I had to let go of the sentimental attachment. I was no longer just a grieving father trying to hold on to the past. I was fighting for the future, fighting to ensure that my life's work wouldn't be erased by someone who had no understanding of what it meant to build something from nothing. One morning, just as I was finishing my coffee, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not Victoria. I looked out the window and saw her car parked outside, her figure walking up the front steps. I didn't know what she was here for, but I had a feeling she wasn't just coming to apologize. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. I was ready. Whatever she had to say, I wasn't going to back down. I walked to the door and opened it, just as she was about to knock. Her eyes widened when she saw me standing there, but she quickly composed herself, a false smile forming on her lips. "Tom," she said, her voice tight, "I think we need to talk." "I agree," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come on in. We can talk, but I won't be making any concessions." Victoria hesitated, then entered the house, glancing around as if assessing everything. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but I wasn't going to let her control the conversation this time. She took a seat at the kitchen table, her hands nervously clasped in front of her. "I've been thinking," she began, her tone more subdued than usual. "Maybe I was too hasty with everything. I didn't mean to hurt you, Tom, but you have to understand. I was just trying to protect my future. Our future, really." I raised an eyebrow. "Our future? You're talking about this house, aren't you?" Victoria looked away, avoiding my gaze. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I thought if I could just manage things, take charge of what was left, maybe things wouldn't feel so out of control." I stood silently, watching her. "Victoria, let me make one thing perfectly clear. This house, the money, the trust, it's all mine, and I'm not going to let you walk away with it. You can't just waltz in here and take control because you think you're entitled to it. You never bothered to ask the right questions. You never bothered to learn the truth." Her face flushed, and I could tell she was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be as simple as she thought. She had underestimated me, and now she was facing the consequences. "I didn't know, Tom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know about the trust, about everything you've done. I was just trying to make sure David's memory lived on." "You're trying to justify your actions," I replied, my voice steady. "This wasn't about David's memory. This was about you wanting control. You saw the house, the life insurance, and you thought you could just take it all." "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "I see that now." There was a long silence between us, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything she had done, everything she had tried to take from me. There was no room for sympathy. "I'm not going to let you erase what David and I built," I said firmly. "This house, these memories, they are mine, and I'm going to make sure they stay that way." Victoria looked down at her hands, the weight of the situation settling in. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We'll let the lawyers handle it," I said, my voice cold. "You can try to contest the trust, but you won't win. I've made sure everything is in order, and if you want to sell the house, you'll have to do it legally, not on your own terms." "I understand," she said, nodding slowly. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could manage everything, take control, but I was wrong." "You were," I said, "and now you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to say anything else. Victoria knew where I stood, and I wasn't about to let her take anything from me. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings, document reviews, and long nights spent reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. Victoria, to her credit, seemed to have calmed down after our conversation. She didn't push me further, nor did she try to enter the house again. I don't know if it was guilt or fear, but she kept her distance. Perhaps she finally understood that she had underestimated me, and that I wasn't going to just roll over. But even with the legal battle ahead, there was a sense of relief in knowing that I had made the right choice. I had stood up for myself, for my dignity, and for everything that I had spent my life building. No longer would I be dismissed as an old man. No longer would I be treated like a burden. One morning, I sat down at my desk, the same desk where I had spent countless hours going over financial reports, planning investments, and managing my affairs. As I sifted through the papers in front of me, I came across something I hadn't looked at in years: the original blueprint of the house. It was a reminder of everything I had accomplished, everything I had worked for. I ran my fingers over the ink lines, tracing the design of each room, each corner. David and I had spent countless hours talking about this house, planning it out. He had been my right hand during construction, always eager to learn how things worked. He had taken pride in the home we were building, just as I had. Those were the days I cherished, the days when it was just the two of us, building a future together. Now, all of that seems so distant. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. The memories were both comforting and painful. But no matter how much I longed for the past, I knew that the future was what mattered now. The house was mine to protect, and I would do whatever it took to make sure no one took it from me. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer again. We went over the legal documents, ensuring that everything was in order before we took the next step. The trust was airtight, and the house's ownership was clearly established in my name. But there was still the matter of Victoria. I needed to be prepared for whatever move she might make next. "She's going to try to drag this out," my lawyer said, flipping through the papers. "She'll likely make a case for contesting the trust, but I'm confident we'll win. The terms are clear, Tom. She has no legal standing." "I know," I said, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "But I still don't want this to turn into a circus. I want it to end quickly, without dragging my family's name through the mud." "We'll make sure it's handled discreetly," my lawyer assured me. "But don't be surprised if she tries to delay things. This is about control for her. She doesn't want to admit she's been wrong." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Victoria had been playing a game, one where she assumed she could take whatever she wanted. And now, she was going to have to face the consequences of her actions. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "I've waited a long time for this. I won't back down." As I left the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. It was like I had finally found my footing again, after so many years of being silenced. I had been pushed to the edge, but now I was fighting back, and that felt good. Later that evening, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Helen, the neighbor who had been such a strong supporter of mine. She had always been there, from the very beginning, and I knew I could count on her. "Tom, I heard from a little birdie that Victoria is planning to sell the house," Helen said, her voice filled with concern. "She's already talking to a realtor about listing it." I felt my blood boil at the mere thought. "She's out of her mind. She can't do that." "I know, Tom," Helen said, her voice softening. "But you need to be prepared. She's trying to get ahead of things. She knows the legal battle is coming, and she wants to make sure she gets something out of it before you take control. She's desperate." "I won't let her get away with it," I said firmly. "This house isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." "Just be careful," Helen warned. "Victoria's not playing fair. She's used to getting what she wants, and she won't give up easily." "I'm not backing down," I said, determination in my voice. "She made the mistake of thinking I would just walk away, but I'm not going anywhere. This house is mine." The call ended, and I stood there for a moment, stewing in anger. I had known Victoria was ambitious, but I never imagined she would go this far. She was trying to sell my home, my memories, to secure a future she hadn't earned. But she didn't realize something important. No one could take what I had worked for without facing the consequences. I made up my mind right then and there. I would file the necessary papers to ensure the house stayed under my control. I would make sure Victoria couldn't make a move without facing the full legal consequences. And I would make sure everyone understood the truth about the house, the trust, and my role in building everything from the ground up. No more lies, no more manipulation. It was time to set things right. The following days felt like a blur of preparation and action. I knew Victoria would try to push the boundaries, but this time I was ready. I spent hours with my lawyer going over every legal document again to ensure there were no loopholes, no weak points she could exploit. We filed the papers with the court, officially asserting my claim to the house, the trust, and everything associated with it. The weight of the legal battle was there, but it didn't feel as heavy as it once had. I had taken control of the situation, and now it was a matter of waiting for Victoria to make her next move. But I wasn't going to wait around in fear or uncertainty. I had learned over the past few weeks that taking action, making decisions, and standing firm in your beliefs were the only ways to regain power. A few days later, I received a call from my lawyer. Victoria had hired a high-powered legal team, a group known for their aggressive tactics. They had sent over a list of demands, trying to negotiate a settlement. They wanted to resolve the matter outside of court, but their terms were outrageous. They were offering a small sum of money in exchange for me walking away from the house and dropping all claims to the trust. The arrogance of it all struck me hard. They thought I would accept a bribe. that I would sell out my own legacy for a quick payout. It was insulting. "No," I said firmly when my lawyer presented me with the offer. "Tell them to take it to court. I'm not backing down. I've worked my entire life for what I have, and I'm not going to let them take it just because they think they can intimidate me with money." My lawyer hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I understand, Tom, but we need to be prepared for a long fight. They won't give up easily." "I don't care how long it takes," I said. "I'm not letting them win." The legal battle intensified over the next few weeks. Victoria's team tried everything: delaying tactics, challenging the validity of the trust, and attempting to discredit my claim to the house. But no matter what they threw at me, I stood my ground. The truth was on my side. I had the documentation, the proof of ownership, and the knowledge that this was my rightful property. One day, as I was going through some old records in the attic, I came across something that took me by surprise. A letter from Margaret. It was a letter I hadn't seen in years, tucked away in a box of old keepsakes. The handwriting was familiar, comforting, and it brought a wave of emotion flooding back. It was dated just a few months before Margaret passed away. In the letter, she spoke of the future, of our hopes for David, and the legacy we would leave behind. She mentioned the house, the trust, and how she had always believed that we would both take care of it together, ensuring that it stayed in the family for generations to come. Reading those words was like a punch to the gut. It reminded me of everything I had lost, not just my son, but my partner, my wife, the woman who had stood by me through everything. She had always been my rock, and now here I was, fighting to protect the future we had built. I held on to the letter for a long moment, letting the words sink in. It was a reminder of why I was doing this. This fight wasn't just about money or property. It was about honoring Margaret's memory, about respecting everything we had built together. I wasn't going to let that be taken from me, not by Victoria, not by anyone. The following week, the court date arrived. It was a tense day filled with anticipation. I had spent so much time preparing for this moment, and now it was finally here. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer by my side, confident but focused. I wasn't there to play games. I was there to win. Victoria was already seated on the opposite side, her arms crossed, her expression one of defiance. She looked at me with a mix of frustration and disbelief, as though she couldn't understand why I wasn't just handing everything over to her. But I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I was there for one reason: to protect my home. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Victoria's legal team went first, presenting their arguments. They tried to undermine my case, but I knew they wouldn't succeed. My lawyer and I had prepared every detail. We had the documents, the witnesses, and the legal precedents on our side. We were ready for whatever they threw at us. When it was my turn, I stood up and walked to the witness stand. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, but I wasn't intimidated. This was my moment. This was my chance to make it clear that Victoria had no claim to what was rightfully mine. I began by explaining the house's history, how I had built it from the ground up, and how David and I had worked together to make it a home. I spoke of the trust Margaret and I had created, how it was designed to ensure that everything we had worked for stayed within the family. I laid out the facts, one by one, until it was clear that there was no argument to be made. Victoria's team tried to push back, but my lawyer was quick to counter every point. We had prepared for this, and now it was paying off. When it was all over, I returned to my seat, feeling a quiet sense of victory. The judge would make her decision soon, but I knew I had done everything I could to protect what was mine. As the day ended, Victoria approached me one last time. This time, there was no arrogance in her step, no condescending words. She looked at me with something closer to resignation, her shoulders slumped, her eyes tired. "I didn't want it to come to this, Tom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what else to do." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You didn't have to do anything, Victoria. You just had to respect what was already here." What I built, what David and I created. She nodded slowly. I was wrong. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The battle had been fought, and I had won. Victoria now understood that you can't take what doesn't belong to you, and you can't erase the past. It wasn't long before the judge delivered her decision. The courtroom was silent when the ruling came down. Victoria's claims were dismissed. The house was mine, the trust was valid, and the life insurance policy, the one Victoria had assumed would be her windfall, remained in the hands of the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, which meant it was still under my control. There was a sense of finality to the judge's words, a sense that the truth had been acknowledged, and all the manipulation and assumptions had been laid bare. I could see the look on Victoria's face as she realized what had just happened. It wasn't a look of triumph, but a mixture of confusion, frustration, and, perhaps, the beginning of understanding. I left the courtroom without saying a word to her. There was nothing more to say. I had fought for my home, for my dignity, and I had won. In the weeks that followed, things slowly started to return to normal. Victoria didn't make any more attempts to contact me. She didn't try to push me out of the house again, though I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to sell the property or make some other move. But now I was prepared. I had the legal victory on my side, and I wouldn't let anyone retake my home or my memories. I spent more time in the house, reconnecting with the spaces that had once been so familiar to me. I took long walks around the property, remembering all the times David and I had worked together to make it what it was. The lawn, the garden, the front porch, it all held so much history, but more than that, it was a reminder of my strength, my resilience. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, Helen came by for a visit. She had been my friend and confidant through all of this, and I couldn't have made it through without her support. "Tom," she said as she sat down beside me, "I heard the news. The judge ruled in your favor, didn't she?" I nodded, a quiet sense of pride swelling in my chest. "Yes, it's over. It's done." "I'm glad," Helen said, her voice warm. "You've worked hard for everything you have. It was never just about the house. It was about standing up for yourself. And I'm so proud of you for doing that." "I didn't want it to be like this," I said, my voice soft. "I never wanted a fight with Victoria, but she pushed me into a corner, and I had to fight back." Helen smiled kindly. "Sometimes you don't have a choice, and in the end you did what you had to do." We sat there for a while in the quiet of the afternoon, just enjoying the peace. I knew there was still work to be done, legal paperwork to finalize, things to be settled, but for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. The storm had passed, the house was mine, and the truth had won. The next few months passed slowly, but in a good way. I kept the house just as it had been, refusing to let anything change. I didn't need to redecorate or make any grand gestures. The house was already perfect. The memories were already perfect. But slowly, as time went on, I started to realize something. The fight for the house, for my dignity, had been a necessary step, but it wasn't the end. It wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about reclaiming my place in the world, about proving that I still mattered, that my years of hard work weren't just going to be erased. Victoria never returned. She never tried to make amends, and I don't know if I was expecting her to. But in the quiet aftermath of everything, I realized that it didn't matter. She had been a part of my life, a part of David's life, but she wasn't the one who would carry on the legacy we had built. I was. One day, while going through some old photo albums, I came across a picture of David and me standing in front of the house. A picture taken just after we had finished the final touches. We were both covered in sweat, our smiles wide as we looked at the place we had made with our own hands. It was one of my favorite photos, and it reminded me of everything we had accomplished together. I stared at the photo for a long time, then placed it back in the album. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had been through a lot, loss, betrayal, legal battles, but I had made it through. The house was still standing, and I was still here to protect it. The house had been a dream, a symbol of everything David and I had hoped for. And now, it was more than that. It was a testament to our hard work, to our bond, to everything we had fought for. And as I stood there, in the home I had built, I realized that no matter what happened next, nothing could take away the legacy I had created.